Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks for some of these really useful statistics. You always get blown away by some of these numbers there, but clearly, as we all know, working in the region, this region is really where everything is happening around the world. It's really great for me to be back in the region. I've worked for almost 17 years in the region before moving to the US over the last 3 years, and I'm really delighted to be back here. I'm also delighted to be back with you today. I really have had the chance and the great opportunity to see the internet's growth from lots of different perspectives, definitely from different angles, from a country perspective, also from different industries. I'm also having a hard time believing that when I first started working in Hong Kong, actually, the main way we communicated were the fax machine. I remember having those 60-page documents, and you send them through the fax machine, and page 59 didn't go through, so you had to start again. It wasn't a pleasant experience. Now, probably talks about my age and why I have no hair. Many of you would not have experienced this, but it was not pleasant. Fortunately, we are in a very different world now. And what I'm seeing is that Asia's growth, and in particular, Asia's growth on mobile has been nothing short of astonishing. But what's really important to understand is that the exciting thing behind the growth that we've seen in Asia is not the technology. It's not the platforms that we've seen growing, or it's not the social networks. The exciting thing really is how users are driving the change. Make no mistakes. Users are at the center of this change that we're seeing. And what's really exciting to me is how the web, the internet as we know, can now help people connect and make decisions more and more every year, and make better and better decisions that they care about and that is useful to our users every year. Users are really driving this change. They started doing different things on mobile devices. They started expecting different things. Now, we all, as an industry, are only starting to understand this better. And the technology is starting to catch up. We're catching up with user behavior, and we're providing technologies that are providing additional benefits to user. So today, I'm going to try and talk about how this is impacting businesses, how this is impacting marketers, and how users really are continuing to drive the change. I'm going to talk about how, as a marketer, you really need to focus on moments rather than mobiles. How you need to be present with users wherever they are, whatever they want to do. But first, let me talk to you about the changes that have occurred over the last 2 years to give you a good, strong outlook of how the industry is going to change further. This chart here was a signal to us that something big was going to happen. Essentially, in 2010, mobile traffic to Google was growing at the same pace desktop traffic had grown when we launched the company, at exactly the same pace. And you could see very clearly from the numbers there. It was really to us a signal that forever the internet was going to change. That was 2010. But for us, what happened between 2011 and 2013 was nothing short than what I'd call a rebuilding of the internet. And a rebuilding of the internet that is far more relevant in Asia Pacific than anywhere else in the world. I think some of the figures that we've seen a few minutes ago exemplify that very well. So as part of the rebuilding of the internet, I think that Asia really led the trend. The last major market to get a smartphone in Asia was South Korea in 2009. Essentially when the iPhone was launched, as you can see from the picture there. Since then, the growth really has been astonishing. By 2011, 21% of Koreans had smartphones. That's 2 years ago. and already 61% of Koreans had smartphones in 2011. Even in markets across the region, where the use of smartphones was relatively small, the intensity of use was remarkable. Now, we all know that Japan is a very big market for mobile devices, where 78% of Japanese were using the smartphone every day already in 2011, compared to only 58% in the US. In India, a country where there are lots of devices but not enough smartphones yet, a survey of smartphone users we did a couple of years back told us that 50% of smartphone users would give up their TV set rather than in smartphones. That was in 2011, where connectivity was still not great in India. That really gives you a great idea of how useful these devices are to people. They're not just adopting the devices, they're adopting the technologies that go with them. Technologies like maps, for instance. Even back in 2011, still there, 2 years ago, in 2011, 2 years ago, Google Maps got more visits from mobile devices than from desktop. 2 years ago, users had already shifted, a real rebuilding of the internet. In 2011 still, Korea became the first country in the world where mobile views on YouTube exceeded desktop views. Users had made their choice. They were rebuilding the internet. The transformation really doesn't stop there. You know, there are 6 billion mobile devices in the world. 2 billion of them are in 2 countries in this region, China and India. In 2012, India's entire mobile traffic exceeded desktop traffic. Desktop is just not going to matter in India. If you have a business and you're thinking desktop first, you will not have a business in a few years. Users are on mobile devices. And we've seen it with our own products. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Android. We launched the first Android device only 3 years ago in 2010. At the start of last year, we were activating 500,000 devices a day. By September, only a few months ago, the pace had risen to 1.3 million devices a day. 1.3 million a day. 2 things are really remarkable about this. First is thinking about the scale of the change that we're really seeing. Now, that pace of device activation is essentially adding the size of a country, the size of the population of a country like China, almost every 3 years. The second is the acceleration that we're seeing. Mobile shipment have now overtaken PC shipment. PCs will never catch up again. And the pace of growth shows no sign of abating. Clearly, this region is at the center of everything that is now important and relevant on mobile devices. We expect that within the next 2 years, so between now and 2015, 500 million people in emerging markets are going to join the internet. That's almost twice the size of the US market alone. Again, another reason why you need to pay particular attention to the figures that Ken mentioned earlier. Asia is where everything is going to happen from a user-based perspective. The users that we're talking about, particularly this new 500 million people that are going to get onto the internet for the first time thanks to mobile devices, will drive the transformation even further. Now, think about it. They will never have had the desktop habits that we have built over the last several years. They certainly won't have any of the fax habits that I took for a few years. But they are completely going to rebuild the internet. They are going to expect totally different things from the devices. They are going to expect different things from the companies that are providing technologies. And they are going to expect different ways in which they are prepared to be reached by marketers. So they are rebuilding the internet from an entirely different foundation. And the great thing is that when you put devices in people's hands, they come up with great new ways to use them. In 2012, already 1 in 4 people in Japan use their mobile phones to make payments. Everything from taxis to vending machines. You can very much see a world now where your wallet is not going to matter. Your wallet is your mobile phone. The interesting thing is that not only they're seeing that as a form of payment, but they're also mixing the mobile use with their daily life and other activities that they may be conducting with other media. This chart essentially shows some of the traffic patterns that we saw during the 2012 Olympic Games. When Paul McCartney sang the song Hey Jude, searches for Paul McCartney on tablets and mobile spiked massively, as you can see on the chart. Desktop had a much, much smaller spike. I'm sure you've all done it. You're in front of the TV, you're seeing something that interests you, where you're turning to your tablet, or you're turning to your mobile device, and essentially you're starting to interact with that song. You make searches, you do whatever you want with it. The trend was as true in Japan as it was in London. In Japan, actually, we saw that 55% of all Olympics-related searches during the first few days of the game were coming from smartphones and tablets. Now that's a real rebuilding of the internet. And this transformation is not going to slow. The users are already there, and they want more information. The transformation also is global. Yet, at a global level, and certainly here in this room, statistically, more than half of you don't have mobile-optimized website, meaning that you are not talking to your users when they want to reach out to you. More than half of you statistically in this room, I'm sure that this room may be slightly more advanced than others, but statistically this is true. It is true in Asia, it is true in more mature markets like the US and the UK. Users are there, marketers not yet. But let's talking about devices for a minute, and let's talk about people. Because the biggest mistake we can make is to look at the changes and think that it's really the devices that are making them. It's not just the devices. They are amazing, it's true. I love them. The devices have amazing characteristics. They know where they are, they have a sense of proximity, they have a sense of velocity, they can see through a camera and recognize pretty much everything. They can hear through their microphones, as you know, and they can name a song or understand a voice command. But the real important thing is not the capability of the device in itself. The most important thing is the connection of that device to the cloud. It is really its most important and unique feature. Whether it's the iPhone or Google Glass, the connection to the cloud makes the device different. It makes things amazing happen, like Google Now. When I arrived in Singapore last night, for instance, I turned on my phone. Google Now essentially worked in the background when I turned on my device and told me, without me asking, the rate of the Singapore dollar versus the US. I had just landed, and it's very useful for me to get that information. It seems very trivial, but it's actually quite difficult for the device to know that. It needs to know that I'm in a different country, and also it needs to know where I come from. So piecing this piece together provides me really useful information. It told me the weather for the week, so that I would know if I needed to wear a raincoat or take an umbrella with me. It told me the time at home, because it knows that I like to call my kids. It has a log of my calls, and it knows that I like to call my kids when I'm in a destination, and it was telling me whether it was the right time or not to do that. It gave me the time of my first meeting, so I'd know if I had to rush. And because I arrived in the afternoon, it also told me, as it knows I often have dinners in my calendar, what type of restaurants I might like to enjoy if I have time for dinner. It can give you lots more information, places to visit, if it sees that, hey, you have time free in your calendar, and so on and so forth. Without even asking, the device is smart enough to essentially, within the cloud, connect with a number of different Google or other products and figure out what's really relevant and important to you. It provides you information that not only enriches your life, but makes it much, much easier to travel to any destination. So essentially, the cloud is allowing the device to exceed its physical limitations. And the OS within the device allows you to have a seamless experience, whether you're using your mobile, your tablet, or your desktop. It provides you with the ability to share, to organize your life in any way you want. So together, it really allows us as people to connect all of our experiences with people. All of our experiences of sharing are really enabled because of the cloud connection and because of the seamless experiences. So computing essentially used to make the rest of the world disappeared as we hunched over one specific item like our desktop. Now with our mobile phones, with our devices, we are taking computing into the world. And we're using it to make our moments in our lives much easier, much more convenient, and much more rewarding. So let's look at about how Asia's behavior on mobile devices is changing itself. In Asia, we really can't focus on devices to get a strategy accomplished to reach users. We really need to look at the bigger picture to really understand what people are doing on these devices. Let's look at China and India, for instance, the two biggest populous countries in the region. Nielsen says that about 2/3 of mobile internet users in China have a smartphone, so a very well-penetrated smartphone country. In India, it's quite different. 80% of people still have cheaper, not as internet-capable feature phones. So you're seeing quite large discrepancies when you look at it this way. However, if you look at it this way, you're only looking at devices. If you look at the users, there are actually a lot more similarities. 35% of users in the US have purchased something on their phone. 35% in the US, remember that stat. In China and in India, it's actually expected that you might buy something on your phone. And in both countries, regardless of whether people are on smartphones or on feature phones, more than half of the users have actually purchased things on the devices. So they're already accepting that the internet, their internet, the internet that they are building, will allow them to make transactions very easily. The internet is essentially evolving the same way across the whole of Asia. It's just different from the West. It's not the people, it's really their expectation. However, in many of the fastest growing markets across Asia, there's a problem. They want the internet to do everything for them. But a lot of the information that we take for granted in many of the more mature countries is not there. People want to build information on the internet as fast as possible. They want to see more in their language, and they want to be on maps. I'm sure you'll laugh and see this map of North Korea that got a lot of coverage as maybe a gimmick. Not that many of you are probably going to travel to North Korea in the next few months. However, the importance of this is that this map was part of a 5-year project by millions of people in the region to map their countries. This is a really important thing for people that live all across the region. Why do people do this? Well, one reason, it saves lives. Let me give you 2 examples. During the Pakistan floods, 2 volunteers organized a campaign to map an entire region of Pakistan online, which you can see part of on this chart here. It had never been mapped before. The map makers did so well that the Pakistan army used it to organize supplies and provide those supplies to people that could not get food. It saves lives. The same principle applies to areas where we already have good maps. When there was a an enormous tsunami in Japan, as you would know, we worked very closely with Honda, and we were able to identify the cars where GPS system had been enabled, and we saw that these cars were able to drive through passages, and because of that, we knew which roads were still drivable and which roads were not. Again, very important to be able to pull people out of the region that was impacted. It really wasn't the device that achieved anything. It was the desire from people to make an internet that looked like their world, what they were seeing in their world. I'll give you a couple more examples. I want to show you here two photos of how the smartphone is really an amazing tool across the region. This photo is actually from a colleague of mine in Tokyo, who used to be a travel writer for Lonely Planet. This is what he packed for a trip to Central America. This was only 5 years ago. Look at all of the things in this photo. No, there's a guidebook, there's a phrase book. There are a few books to read. There's maps, there's a camera, there are memory cards, there's a GPS, there's a compass, there's a flashlight. All things that you would actually need if you wanted to do a big trip. Think about these things and think about what your smartphone does now. Essentially, every single one of these items is not necessary anymore. Your smartphone can do all this. And this guy here knew that. Last year, an ex-Marine, now called Winston Fiery, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, as you can see on the photo there, he decided to take a trip across Southeast Asia. He used Google Maps to get walking directions from Singapore to Hong Kong, then traveled to the Philippines and used that as well. He used Google Translate while he was there because he was bitten by a dog in Thailand, and he needed help for rabies. He continued to travel and use Google Translate to tell an old man in Vietnam who had elephant man syndrome that just an hour away from that man lived a doctor who could perform surgery who could cure him forever. Our travel experiences using the internet, because of the capability of devices that are constantly with you, are really enriching people's life. And this is also true for education. The next time you are on a bus, please take a look at what's on people's screen without being too creepy. Everybody has a screen on a bus now, on a train, whatever mode of transport you're using. Sometimes people are playing games. No, sometimes people are watching news. Sometimes people are doing more. A colleague of mine from Singapore told me that on his recent bus trip in Singapore, he sat next to a guy who watched for 40 minutes a lecture on how to code Python for the entire 40 minutes ride. How do you call this? Do you call this commuting, or do you call this distance learning? I certainly call it distance learning. The rewarding experiences are changing entirely. This slide here shows a YouTube channel that's gotten almost 2 million views. Obviously, you can clearly see that it's not kittens and it's not the Harlem Shake. It's actually lectures from a professor called Chris Tisdall at University of New South Wales in Australia. Most of his audience actually isn't even in Australia. Most of his audience is in India. Most of his audience is in the US. So essentially, you can now watch a trigonometry course by an Australian professor in a smartphone, in a bus, in Singapore. Try that in 2010. The internet is being rebuilt entirely. And all this means that it's really time to think differently about Asia. Asian businesses are really starting to look away from the West and more look at each other. How many of you had heard of Korean pop songs in 2010? Probably not many in this audience, unless you spend a lot of time in Korea. There's one here at least. I'm sure there's a few more. But in that year, the Korean pop industry began to look at the internet as a way to reach all markets around Korea. At that stage, it had taken 4 years for the most popular Korean band to become the #1 band in Japan. In 2010, Girls' Generation, a Korean pop band, got to #1 in Japan on the first week of its release. 1 week. Why? Well, fairly simply. Japanese fans had been watching it on YouTube already. They knew all about it, and as soon as it was released, this thing took off. In 2011, the number of views of K-pop videos reached 2.3 billion on YouTube in 235 countries. Think about the culture of Korea being spread to the world in a matter of weeks across the world. Very powerful, and very powerful as well for many brands who used it to sell their products afterwards. And obviously, I don't need to tell you anything about Psy. But a lot of people took the wrong lesson from Psy. K-pop really became big because it reached Asian consumers where they are. Is Psy a smartphone or a desktop or a TV star? It's just a star. And in emerging markets, this will be even more important. One of the surveys we did across Asia showed that in the poorest countries and for the poorest people in Asia, including in India and Java, 50% of them who had a mobile phone listened to radio on their phone. They really see their phones as multimedia devices. Imagine what they will expect when all of their world becomes online. So if that's all possible today, what does the future of Asia look like? We think that all these screens will actually add up to an experience that is much more human and physical than our device-centric world today. Here's one look at the future. This video is essentially an invitation for people to start using Google Glass. All the footage here was shot on Google Glass. Google Glass is absolutely awesome. I'm sure you all want to get your hands on it. But most of what makes this video amazing is really in the hands of all of you today. I would argue probably in a clunkier format, but all of the things that you can do on Google Glass is essentially already in your hands. So essentially, this is where we're heading. But it's not so easy for organizations to adjust. I know that many of you probably in the room here have a separate internet strategy group. Many of you probably also have a separate mobile internet strategy group. The truth today is that people are more important than devices. A person with a smartphone, a person using a TV, a person using the tablet is one person, not three. A person using a tablet does not change into a different person just because they sit down at a computer. People are connecting every single part of their lives to every other part. They want their experiences to be seamless. They want the way they access your information to be as easy, whatever the devices they're using. People absolutely love this, and you should too. If you are a marketer in Asia today, you are a multi-screen marketer. You need to be present during all of the moments that really matter for your users. Again, most of you in this room, statistically, do not have a mobile-optimized website. Are you really there for your users during the moments that really matter? As marketers, you will need to help your organization get through a period of enormous change. A period that I would say is of enormous opportunities as well for the companies who invest online. The challenge really for you is not to bury everything on the complexity. That's what will happen if you focus everything on devices and try to build a new strategy for each device. One for feature phone, one for smartphones, one for TV, one for tablets. A survey we ran in India showed that young people switch between devices more than 20 times a day. So please stop. Stop counting devices. Trust me, you'll lose count faster than you can reorganize your business. Your opportunity really lies in what is motivating Asia to buy so many different devices. They expect the web, which is linked across all of those devices, to enrich their lives. So you really should focus on these moments. And if we do, we can do just that, enrich people's lives. Thank you.